So time for a film review. And the film I'm going to be discussing really needs no introduction. It's one of the best known films ever because it was so controversial. The film is The Exorcist. Now, The Exorcist, just to give a few of the basic details for people who still haven't seen it, and I guess that's partly whom this video is aimed at. So I'm not actually going to be giving away too many spoilers, or at least I'll try not to. But as I say with all these videos, there will be some, so just bear that in mind. So the film was released in 1973, directed by William Friedkin, and starring Linda Blair, Max von Sydow, Jason Miller, and Ellen Burstyn. Just a completely irrelevant side point, Ellen Burstyn looks fantastic for a woman of her age. She's in her early 80s now, but yeah, the last picture I saw of her, she's really looked after herself. Um, Totally irrelevant point, but just because she's in the film. So basically, this film is about demonic possession, and I think that firstly, it's based on a novel by Peter William Blatty, I believe, or William Peter Blatty, which was published in 1971. There had been actually a number of similar films throughout the early 1970s. There was the Amityville Horror. There was um, there was another film about possession which I've seen online. I haven't watched it yet. I believe it was called Possession of Joel Delaney, something like that. But what happened with The Exorcist was that when the producer approached the Catholic Church for collaboration, obviously for the theological side of it, they said, we will work with you, but we want you to take this seriously. We don't want this to just be a horror film. We want you to take this seriously. This is a sacred issues that you're touching on. And basically, the film starts off in Iraq. I haven't read the novel, so I can't comment on that. The film starts off in Iraq, where an elderly priest, played by the actor Max von Sydow, and I'm assuming they put heavy makeup on him. He would have only been in his 40s at the time because he's about 84 now, I believe. So 73 would have been in his 40s. But basically, he's made up to be an elderly priest who's in an archaeological dig in northern Iraq. And even from the outset, there's some very atmospheric scenes. There's The Iraq scenes are very atmospheric. That in itself is creepy. Um, there's two rabid dogs fighting in the desert. The locals aren't overly friendly. It's the whole atmosphere is just very well done. Um, anyway, it then goes to modern day Washington D.C. Well, D.C. as it then was, the Georgetown suburb, and it focuses on a actress and her young daughter. By any stretch of the imagination, a perfectly normal, rather well-off family. Um, and the woman's estranged from her husband. She has two servants, but there's nothing particularly out of the ordinary. Anyway, she's working on a set for a film about student protests, and the director of the film has a relatively important role. His character is called Burke Dennings. I forget the name of the actor now, but it is worth pointing out that the actor who played the director in the film actually died on set. Whether that was something connected to the film or not, I don't know, but it certainly brought about a lot of discussion from the so-called Exorcist cursed. So basically, this is just a normal young 12-year-old girl, and she has an imaginary friend, Captain Howdy. She then one day plays with a Ouija board. Her mother's an agnostic, so she sort of humors the little girl. And Reagan, by the way, that's what the little girl's called, Regan. And that's it really. But over time, the little girl's behavior gets a little bit more erratic. She swears. She starts getting quite just behaving in a strange way. Her mother's having a party. The young girl comes down and urinates on the carpet and says to one of the guests, "You're going to die up there tonight." Now, in the background and sort of backstory to this is that there is a priest, Father Jason. excuse me, Father Damien Karras, um, and his faith is being wavered because of the situation of his mother. His mother recently died. She'd been put in an institution, and he felt guilty about that. And he has recurring nightmares where he sees his mother. But basically, his faith has lapsed, and he finds it difficult to believe in the church anymore. Um, but nevertheless, he becomes involved in this case, and over time, the little girl's condition, Reagan's condition, gets worse and worse and worse. And there's one bit that for me, absolutely, and I'll be absolutely candid about this. When the film was re-released in the UK in the early 2000s, I'll come to the scene in a second. Just want to explain the background here. I remember there being a lot of talk about it. This was about 2002, thereabouts. Anyway, I got the film on video. I would have been about 17 or something at the time, so I wasn't a kid. I wasn't like, I wasn't a kid, but I wanted to see it, and I think I may have even seen it before that. May have been as early as 2001, when I was 15 or 16. Anyway, I remember there was a lot of talk about it being released, and I bought it. Well, I watched it up until the first major scene of what was the possession. Um, that's about half an hour into the film, and basically the little girl's going up and down on the bed. The noises the mother had previously attributed to rats, which is going up and down in the bed, and then at one point she makes this ghastly noise and her throat sort of bulges out, her eyes roll back. Honestly, if you know the film well, you'll know well what scene I'm talking about. I actually turned the video off at that point. I don't mind admitting that. I turned it off because I was not prepared for the sort of shock that, this is the sort of film that I'll say something about The Exorcist, because of the satire and the parodies that have been around it, for example, Scary Movie 2, and because it is so well known and because it has been parodied so many times, unfortunately, or, it's had a. People don't take it seriously today. I guarantee you, if you've never seen this film before and you watch it for the first time, it is a genuinely shocking film. I'll just show you something. I was watching this film last night. I'm in a 115-year-old house. Check out my street. Now, does that or does that not look like the Exorcist Street? Anyone who's seen the film will know what I'm talking about. I've actually got a friend who won't come here for that reason. But this is a genuinely disturbing film. It's a very powerful film. And basically, cut a long story short, the possession gets worse and worse and worse. She becomes horribly scarred, and her voice changes. And her mother, first of all, gets a legion of doctors in, and she gets increasingly frustrated when they all put it down to a state of the mind and all sorts of neurological conditions. But eventually, despite being agnostic, she goes to the church, and incidentally, there's another point where the local church is desecrated, so that just adds to the overall atmosphere of this. Anyway, eventually she gets Father Damien Karras to come in, and he initially tries to not do an exorcism but have some sort of communication with the demon, to no avail. Then he brings in Father Merrick, or Merrin, I should say, who has experience and who had been involved in an exorcism in Africa years previously. So together they exorcise this demon from young Reagan, but the exertion of it really takes it out of the old man, and he ends up dying. And basically, the scene ends with the film ends with Father Karras um, saying, take me," and the demon possesses him, and he lunges out of a window. Um, there's so many scenes in this film that are worth mentioning, and I'm sure I won't even cover all of them in this. One of the most powerful things about The Exorcist, I think, is the suspense. It doesn't go straight into it. The atmospheric techniques are very powerful, and the scenes are the thing is it's not a conventional horror film because it's not some sort of killer in a hood or an old haunted house. It's a perfectly normal suburban house, and I think that's what makes the film so powerful. And the little girl is, she's not sugar and spice, but she's just a normal young 12-year-old girl. And the part that this film has is so strong. I watched it last night and I've forgotten how good a film it actually is in terms of what it does. The renowned film critic Mark Kermode here in the UK called it the greatest film ever made. The Catholic Church held it in high regard. It was banned for many years in several jurisdictions because it was so shocking. Um, there's one scene towards the end where another priest, a friend of Father Karras' hand is shaking, and that's actually an interesting side note. Apparently, William Friedkin had yelled at him just before that scene. Apparently, he's quite a hard-ass director to work with, but he did create a masterpiece in this film, and I think it has got a very fair claim to being the scariest film ever made, and that is not an easy feat to pull. There's been many, many, many horror films made since then, and there's certainly been some disturbing ones. I would say, for example, House of Wax is up there. I haven't seen the original, but the remake I think is quite creepy. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, of course, there's a lot of other films that are impressive at what they do, but I do think The Exorcist stands out. I think it's unsurpassed. Among modern films, one of the most disturbing I've seen was As Above, So Below. That comes not quite on level with The Exorcist, but it is a disturbing film. It's about a group of kind of anarchist cave dwellers who go under the streets of Paris, and well, that's for another film review. But that's the only film I can think of in recent times that really comes anywhere near the sort of psychological effect The Exorcist has. The worst sequels made. William Friedkin had nothing to do with them, and the first sequel, I should say, has been rubbished as among the worst films ever made. Now, I haven't seen it, so I don't know if that's fair or not. The only people in the original cast who were in it were Linda Blair, I believe Max von Sydow was, and Kitty, forget her name now, but she played the a friend of Reagan's mother. Anyway, if you haven't seen The Exorcist, do watch it, but don't listen to all this nonsense. People crack jokes about it. This is a genuinely powerful film, and if you watch it for the first time, it has no effect on you. Then all I could say is you must be robotic because this is a film that really is genuinely. I think there's a lot of bravado out there, especially from guys. Oh, they like to crack jokes at it, and the thing is, when you look at it from a point of view of parody, it can be quite funny, especially the persistent swearing of the possessed Reagan. But don't watch the clips of it on YouTube because that will spoil the effect the film has. If I watch those clips now, they would have no effect. But if I watch the whole film from start to finish, that has an effect because of the suspense. And yeah, just check it out. It's a very powerful film. There have been other films about exorcism. There was The Exorcism of Emily Rose. That was quite a good film. There was a German film called Requiem, which was also quite powerful. Both were loosely based on the real life case of a young German woman, Anneliese Michel, who died in 1972. She was a devout Catholic girl and she was said to have been seriously possessed. There are actually rather disturbing voice recordings of her so called possession. Thing about this is, I'm not going to get way too much into the theological side of things for this video, but in The Exorcist, there's one point where one of the psychologists says it's a part of suggestion. That is to say, people of faith believe in the power of evil, they believe in the devil. So, by the same logic, they believe in the power of possession to get rid of the devil, i.e., the power of persuasion. Um, but if you listen to the recordings of Anneliese Michel, they're very disturbing. She may have been suffering from some sort of schizophrenia, but um, there's still the jury's out on that one. Certainly the recordings are strange. She'd done all sorts of weird things. She would eat live spiders as they crawled around her room, and just very disturbing things. And the striking thing about that case was she was an attractive young woman, good looking young woman. And if you see the photos before she died, it's very disturbing. So check that out, Annalea's Michelle. There have, of course, been other possession cases, or alleged possession cases. In fact, The Exorcist itself was based on a young boy in Chicago called William Doe, or at least that was the pseudonym that was used, who was said to have been possessed in the late 50s, but there's very little details available about that. So, yeah, that's my review of The Exorcist. Very powerful film, very good at what it does. And yeah, I would say it's got a good claim to being the scariest film ever made. I find one of the problems with horror films nowadays is firstly they give everything away in the trailer, which totally ruins it. Um, I mean, the old 70s trailers were a bit long, but they didn't give much away. With with modern trailers, they irritate me because they really do give too much away. And that's a pity because sometimes you have a decent film that is ruined because people don't see it because the trailer doesn't do it justice. Another problem I have with modern horror films is they try too hard. The thing about The Exorcist, there's certainly special effects used, but not to the point of being absurd. I mean, I'd say the film 1408, it's a good film and it has a lot of promise, but I think the thing that let down 1408 was that they just went too far in the special effects. If you've seen that, the whole scene where the room floods and all, I think that just got, when you drive the special effects that far, I don't think that makes it scarier. I think it makes it like almost tedious, in a sense. You know, directors shouldn't over rely on special effects, in my opinion. Certainly, special effects have their place. In The Exorcist, obviously, they didn't have CGI or anything like that back in 1973, but they did use sound effects, which were very effective. Anyway, I'll round it up there. The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin, very powerful film. Um, Incidentally, the actor who played Father Karras died at just 62 in 2001. Jason Miller, who was a director in his own right. So there you have it, The Exorcist. Check it out.